So anytime you're speaking up, for most people, there's going to be some fear, some parts of you, not your whole self, not your wisest self. There's some parts of you that feel scared of being ignored or scared of being rejected, scared of being criticized, disrespected. And in the end, it's not even about me. It's about something bigger. And what that something bigger is, everyone can define for themselves.
Welcome to the Gen X Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey Gen Xers, welcome back to the podcast. Today I am so honored and inspired and excited to share a really powerful conversation with Sara Giita Flores. Sara transformed her life from a place of trauma-induced silence and shame into one of radiant self-expression, drawing wisdom from her 17 years as a voice coach, speaker, and singer-songwriter. Sara helps soulful women to speak their truth and spread their message. Her healing work has been featured on NBC News, KGNU Radio, Westward Magazine, and more. And in January 2024, she released her first full-length book called Unleash Your Goddess Voice, which is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I'll put all the information in the show notes. Sara is also the owner of her own company, Embrace Your Voice. And this conversation really landed for me in ways that feel empowering, that light me up, and that invite even me, as someone who is very used to using her voice, to being in public, to being seen, to public speaking, to actually continue to find ways that I haven't allowed my voice and myself to be seen and heard. This conversation is for anyone, no matter what gender you identify as. And Sara does let us know that her work focuses exclusively on supporting and guiding women in finding their true voice. But my hope is that in listening to this podcast, that you approach it with curiosity, with openness, that if you hear anything that might be triggering or challenging for you, that you resource yourself, go get some tea or water or a blanket, go pet your dog or your cat, because we do talk a little bit about Sara's sexual trauma as a child, and we talk about some challenging concepts and belief systems that get in the way of all of us, particularly women, being able to find our inner voice in a way that allows us to show up and serve and not people please. So we talk a lot about people pleasing. We talk about trauma, how that shows up in our lives and keeps us from creating the space, from finding the connection with the divine spirit, goddess, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, that connection that allows all of us to find our true purpose, our true calling, and connect to that inner voice deep inside us. So sit back, relax, grab a nice comforting drink or a blanket, and enjoy this conversation with Sara Giita Flores. Hey, Sara, welcome to the Gen X Shift podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here. I'm really excited to get to tell everybody about how we met, because I think it's one of those really fabulous examples of a divine synchronistic connection. So we're going to get into that, but I wanted you to just say hi to everybody first.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm so excited to connect with your audience.
Yeah. I'm excited to bring you to the audience because I'm going to let everybody know up front, you are not a Gen Xer. I mistakenly thought you were a Gen Xer because, so let me tell folks how we met and why I thought you were a Gen Xer. We met actually because I signed up on I think, meetup, because you had an amazing networking event that was celebrating your book launch, which we're going to talk about. And it was on Zoom. And I realized that you were actually here in Westminster, Colorado, which is like 10, 15 minutes from me, basically. And on that networking event, I resonated so much with your energy, the way you facilitated the group, the breathing exercises and grounding exercises we did at the beginning of that. And then you put us into breakout rooms, and I got to connect with another amazing millennial, not a Gen Xer, named Holly Chase, who's also going to be on the podcast. I've recorded an episode with her, which is fabulous. And so Holly and I made an awesome connection. And after that call, I reached out to you and said, I just love how you facilitated that group. I love the space that you created, the energy that you brought. And so, since you live close, let's meet up. And so we met for coffee. We had a beautiful conversation. And I felt that you have such a wise soul and that you've experienced and been through so much in your life that I just assumed we were of the same generation. Not to say that millennials don't have wisdom, I'm not saying that at all. It just felt like we were sort of on the same generational plane, I guess. And then when we were doing the little pre-interview for the podcast, you said, I feel a little imposter syndrome because I'm not a Gen Xer. And I'm like, oh, not a problem. It's okay. This is not just a space for Gen Xers, because one of the things I want to do with the podcast is create bridges between the generations, because I think every generation has something to learn from the other generations. And you are one of those millennials who has such a wealth of wisdom, of teachings, of experience that I think is going to be helpful for people of all generations. So I love that we connected that way. I love that I mistakenly thought that you were a Gen Xer. And so we're giving you an honorary Gen X hall pass for the day.
Woohoo!
So welcome to Gen X. So let's start off, because you do have such a rich background, and I find it interesting and fascinating to understand people's childhoods, their background, how they were influenced by culture, society, family, the time periods that we grew up in ways that have impacted their journey and where they are now. And so can you take us through your background, your childhood a little bit, and let us have a little more insight into who you are?
Yes. So much of my life has been centered around losing my voice and reclaiming it, and now helping others to bring their voices, their authenticity more fully out into the world with confidence. And this all started really due to trauma. I was sexually assaulted by my friend's dad when I was 5 years old. I had other traumatic experiences as a teen. And from those experiences, I learned to expect that if I spoke up for my needs, that my voice would be demonized, disrespected, dismissed. And I learned to shut down my pure expression and narrow everything to focus on pleasing others. I organized my whole life to sense, how are others feeling? Are they approving of me? Are they possibly disapproving of me? And how can I modify myself and my behavior to be more pleasing to them so that I can feel safe? And I often meet people who resonate with my story, even if they haven't experienced sexual trauma. This is a big pattern for people who are raised as female, that we're taught to please others, to be nice, to focus on other people's needs first. And regardless of gender, many people are socialized or have life experiences that make them feel like their needs, their voice, who they are, needs to take a back seat to the needs of others. And this was all completely unconscious until I had a wake up call that really brought me inside when I was 19 years old. So, all alongside this childhood, I had found a self expression through music. I took piano lessons growing up and singing lessons, and that was my one safe way to show up and be seen a little bit in a way that felt safe. And when I was 19 and I was a piano major in college, I got hit with tendonitis. I had so much pain in my wrists and my neck and my shoulders that I couldn't play piano for a while. And all of my years of perfectionism, of feeling like I needed to perform and do and achieve and be everything to everybody and fulfill everybody's expectations, they all came crashing down. And I said, if I'm not perfect, who am I?
Mm.
And it was quite a journey. There were so many emotions that had to be excavated for me to even show up to appointments like physical therapy and have the emotional resilience to do the physical healing. And eventually, this led me to trauma healing, to doing a lot of trauma resolution therapy to heal my past. And the other major factor in my own healing was self expression, writing, journaling, writing songs, singing songs, blogging. All of these things helped me reconnect with my voice that was always there, but had been kind of tamped down under all these filters of trying to please other people. And I eventually gave a name to my authentic self expression. I call it the goddess voice. And the goddess voice is your unique upwelling of divinely inspired self expression. And I believe everyone has a goddess voice inside, regardless of gender. We all have this capacity to express ourselves deeply, joyfully, authentically, in a way that's not just coming from the thoughts of the mind and how can we please others, but it's coming from somewhere deep within that is connected to our expansiveness, our divinity, whatever that may mean to you, that our spirit can speak through us. And it is my passion and my pleasure to witness other people who I support in my work finding deeper layers of their goddess voice and feeling the urge to sing or to speak, learning how to set boundaries and speak up for their needs with their family members or coworkers. Many of my clients go on to speak on podcasts, to speak on stages. And really the theme in all of this is finding your voice, which, growing up, millennial, Gen X, all of us have gone through things and there's so many layers of cultural shame that are imposed on us about being unique, being ourselves, that I find almost everybody can benefit from tapping their voice and expressing it in the world.
First of all, I hope my listeners are getting a sense, the same as I did when I first met you, of what a gifted storyteller you are. You express yourself and your story in such a beautiful and profound way. And I think that is both a gift and a talent, because I'm sure you work on it. It's not just, it's not easy, right? To learn to be a storyteller. And so I thank you for sharing your story, your vulnerability. I want to circle back and unpack a couple of the things that you said. And let me start with the goddess voice, because how I interpret that, and what I'm curious, sort of, you touched on this a little bit, but to give it a little bit deeper flavor for our listeners, is that, as you said, it doesn't matter what gender you identify as. For me, when I hear goddess voice, it makes me think it's a type of energy. Like we all have, all of us, male and female energies, and we have our different sort of cocktails of how those energies express, right? For me, I've always felt like I have a little more male energy. I'm a little more rough and tumble, a little more assertive, a little more aggressive, have traditionally been less connected to my emotions. I function from a neck up as opposed to a whole bodied experience. And being able to express, be creative, be in touch with our bodily sensations and our emotions, those are more of the female energies. And the good news is that everybody can learn the advantages and disadvantages of both of those energies and learn how to cultivate them in a way that's more supportive for them in their life. So when I hear goddess energy for anybody, doesn't matter again what gender you identify as, we're talking about getting in touch with your creativity, your expressiveness. So tell me if we can have different understandings for sure, but let me know if like I'm understanding you correctly and how you were discussing that.
Yes.
Yes. Plain and simple. Yes. Good answer, lawyer. That's a good lawyer answer. Just yes. Moving on. Yeah. So tell me how tapping into that goddess voice, that creativity, that expression, tell me how that has enabled you to make transitions and shifts in your life.
Yes. So, a really big transition for me has been going from victim mode into being empowered. So, for obvious reasons, I went through my life feeling like a victim, feeling like everything was against me. Anytime something challenging happened, I felt like, oh, do I really have to deal with this? And the the transition from from being primarily in that victim mode to living my life from a more empowered stance was not about eradicating the thoughts and feelings that come along with feeling victimized. It was really about strengthening that sense of my empowerment. And so much of it was connected to knowing, okay, I'm going to have these thoughts like, oh, how could they do this to me? How could this happen? Why does this always happen? The kind of victim thoughts. And knowing that my job wasn't to eradicate them, but it was to make space for something even bigger to come through.
Mm.
And to me, that something bigger is the divine, it's the mystery. And it's also this upwelling of self-expression that is a bit mysterious. We don't always know, where did that idea come from, right? Sometimes we know where it comes from. Other times it feels like, that just kind of arose. And so because I'm so passionate about creating and expressing myself, that gave me the light that pulled me forward into, if I want to bring my voice into the world, I need to feel more empowered. I need to believe in myself more. And when I was able to more fully step into the power of my voice and make enough space, enough energetic space to say, this isn't about if I'm good enough or not. This is about making the space and being the vessel for something bigger to come through, for my message, for my story, for my presence, whatever it is in the moment. It's not just about those small self worries and thoughts.
That just landed someplace deep in me and gave me goosebumps. And I'm so grateful to hear you say that it's not about eradicating the trauma or the challenging emotions, because I think that's such an important reminder for people that, number one, we want to find ways to turn toward the trauma, the challenging, difficult things that we've experienced in life, so that we can become our most empowered, purposeful selves. And to do that doesn't mean, this is the second thing, that you are getting rid of the bad things that happen to you, or the trauma, or the sadness, or even the feelings of victimhood. Because I believe, and I think you do too, that I look at things through the lens of my mindfulness and coaching teachings, that, as you said, we want to make space for all of it. Because the more energy we spend resisting the bad things that happened, the challenging, icky emotions that we don't want to deal with, that kind of resistance takes a toll on us. And therefore, we can't fully be empowered and step into the purpose driven lives that we want to have. And so, to kind of put a bow on all of that, I think Gen Xers in particular, and probably a lot of millennials and definitely a lot of boomers, are great at resisting, resisting the crap that happened to us as kids that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to look at, we don't want to remember. And denial, ignoring, stuffing down, swallowing, all of those things are resistance. And they keep people from being able to make transitions in their lives where they have dreams that are on the other side of those transitions that they just haven't been able to make, or from even moving through transitions that are forced upon them, whether it's the death of somebody or a physical health issue, transitions that are forced upon us. If we haven't been able to give space, as you're talking about, it makes moving through that transition all the more difficult. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope that plants some seeds for folks to learn how to do that. So tell me how you did learn to do that. What were some of the practices or teachings that you learned that allowed you to start to create that kind of space and to hold space for some very challenging, traumatic things that happened to you?
The first practice is the breath. And I know we hear so much about breath work, and I get tired of it too sometimes.
I do too. I get a little bit triggered around just do some breath work. I'm like,
right.
Because doing breath work for people that have had trauma,
Mm-hmm.
particularly sexual assault trauma and other types of trauma too, coming into your body to connect to your breath can be re-traumatizing. So tell me about the breath work that you did, or focusing on the breath.
Yes. So because I have so many years of training as a singer, that was a doorway that I could be focused on getting to know the movement of my diaphragm and the air coming in and out without feeling like I had to go too deep into emotions. And once I had healed enough in my body and healed enough of the trauma and got to a place of feeling stable enough, I started feeling like treating breathing in just a mechanistic way of, how do you let the air in? How much air do you let in? And how do you exhale it as you speak or sing? I felt like it didn't have enough juice. It didn't have enough feeling for me. And I started playing with, how can the breath be a practice of receiving and giving? I say receiving first because I always think of the inhale first. Inhale is when your diaphragm moves down, your lungs fill with life-giving air, and you are receiving exactly what your body needs to thrive. It is the most fundamental act of receiving nourishment that keeps us alive and thriving. And really tuning into that receiving aspect of the breathing helped me learn to fill up energetically so that I had more to give. Going along with the people pleasing, I definitely have the overgiving tendency that has been in a lifetime of healing. I also started having kids fairly young. I had my first child at age 25, so I was really put into that giving role by necessity. And starting with receiving gave me the nourishment to feel like I had more to give through my voice. So that's the first practice. And the second overarching practice, which I teach in many different ways, but to sum it all up, I would describe it as being a conduit for something greater. So, learning to open up my palms and
Mm.
say, speak through me, let me be of service. It's a great way to connect with your deeper self, for one, and also to work around all the thoughts of. So, anytime you're speaking up, for most people, there's going to be some fear, some parts of you, not your whole self, not your wisest self. There's some parts of you that feel scared of being ignored, or scared of being rejected, scared of being criticized, disrespected. And again, when we open ourselves up to be a conduit for something bigger, then it reminds us, okay, those fears are not the end all be all. They do not have to stop me. They deserve love and attention and support. But in the end, it's not even about me. It's about something bigger. And what that something bigger is, everyone can define for themselves.
Yeah, that's again, that just every listening to every word you said is like receiving a multivitamin for me. It just, I feel it sink into my bones, into my body, and everything in me is just like, yes, 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 yes. Because my big takeaway from that is that we as humans are here, each and every one of us, I truly believe, here for particular reasons, for a purpose, for a mission, whatever we want to call it. And the human vessel is here to do that particular thing. And yet, we couldn't do that thing without being able to receive the divine, God, spirit, whatever we want to call it, the energy that actually animates us as human beings. And we don't know what that is. That's the great mystery that you referred to. And so, as humans, we get all wrapped up in our humanity, our human selves, right? And we sort of get in the way of ourselves. And when we can learn to sort of take ourselves out of it, which is so hard, that could be a whole conversation in of itself. It's so hard to learn to detach from making it about ourselves, to open up to that mystery, to divine guidance, to that energy, and trust and surrender. Trust and surrender that when we do that, we are going to be exactly where we need to be. And so I love that invitation to take ourselves out of it, to detach from the ego that we get so wrapped up in. I want to come back to you said something that caught my attention a couple of times when you were first sharing your story about being a people pleaser, which is so common, especially for women. And also, I don't want to leave out the fact that being a people pleaser is also common for men, for people of the LGBTQIA community. It doesn't matter. Again, I don't think we're talking about any particular gender identity here because people pleasing is a Western cultural phenomenon. And we were sort of raised, especially my generation, to serve everybody, subjugate yourself, put your needs second, make sure everybody around you is okay. And so I'm really curious, how do we navigate being of service, being open to that energy of the divine that we are here to let flow through us? How do we balance that kind of service? And maybe balance isn't even the right word, but how do we not then get caught up in people pleasing? Like, what's the difference between service and people pleasing?
The thing I want to drive home about people pleasing is that it is a non cognitive response, it is a trauma response. So, we've danced around the topic of trauma a lot in this. And many people would feel like, well, I don't know if I have anything that constitutes trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, we live in a culture where trauma has been the air we breathe. Oppression, judgment, hate, these are patterns that are around us and that we absorb when we see maybe someone in our school got bullied. Maybe it wasn't even us, but we observed that. And some part of us said, that could happen to me. I need to do everything possible to avoid that happening to me. Or we see someone who looks like us on the news being taken down publicly, being called a liar. We see someone being disrespected. And then there's also intergenerational patterns of trauma that we don't necessarily even realize, but things like my great grandmother was sent to a sanatorium when she was in deep grief because she immigrated from Europe, and she started receiving letters about all of her loved ones dying in Europe, and she realized she was never going to see them again. And when she got home, her husband had burned all the photos, all the letters, all the things from her family, right? Like, this is a challenging, painful experience that was not talked about. So that's the thing. I don't mean to be a downer at all about this trauma, but just to let us acknowledge that it's there. Because when we acknowledge it, then we have the power to heal it. And we realize that trauma is not a life sentence. Growing up in a culture where a lot of trauma gets passed around through name calling and hate does not mean that you have to live in the patterns anymore. And the way that you can free yourself is by creating a sense of safety in your body. There's some simple practices like you can hug yourself, give yourself gentle squeezes if that feels good.
Mm-hmm.
You can connect to your feet on the ground. You can do self-massage. And find safe groups of people, small safe groups. Might be just with a coach or a therapist where you can be seen and heard, or it might be a small group where you can be safely seen and heard, where you can speak up, you can be yourself, and know that you'll be respected. And when we create that sense of safety, it's an ongoing process of creating the safety within. And then unlearning people pleasing is something that happens more on the body level as you start to feel like, okay, I'm setting a boundary and it's actually okay. It's feeling okay in my body. Then that's where you start to make the shift so that you can be in choice. So that's the big difference, I would say, between people pleasing and being of service, is that people pleasing, it's an unconscious compulsion. There's no shame in it. I still have moments of people pleasing that come up, right? It's not like I'm 100% healed with this, but I have learned so much and come so far. And what I've seen, that the key is having empowered choice. And when you wish to be of service, being of true service will come from a place of overflow, a feeling like you are filled up inside and you have love in your heart to give through whatever work or volunteer work or relationships, whatever creative projects you feel called to. So it comes from that place of choice and overflow, of feeling like this would bring me meaning, and I have the trust that it would bring meaning to others as well.
Beautifully said. A couple of things I want to come back to in that. The latter part of how I hear you talk about the difference between service and people pleasing, for me, it made me think of a quick check or a quick way to know kind of what you're doing, is that I know the times when I feel I am serving, it feels regenerative. It doesn't feel like my tank is going to run on empty, because it comes back to what you said about the breath. Because when the times when I am truly in service, I am both receiving and giving.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about just give, 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 give. And for me, that's when the people pleasing comes in, is that you are giving and giving and giving and giving and completely sacrificing yourself in unhealthy and unsupportive ways. So that's what I'm hearing is the distinction in what you're saying. I want to
Yes.
I want to come back to the trauma piece too, because it is so important. And I love that you recognize that trauma can be in our systems from our own personal experiences, from observing what has happened to other people, and intergenerational. And I want to add a couple things to those too. Again, recognizing I'm not a trauma expert. It's just been a lot of work that I've done over the last years and listened to a lot of people who are experts. And two of those experts are Gabor Mate and Resmaa Menakem in his book My Grandmother's Hands. And what Resmaa Menakem talks about is the intergenerational trauma, which I want to be clear for people. This is a scientific fact. We know that when our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents have experienced trauma, if that trauma isn't metabolized, as Gabor Mate talks about, it fundamentally affects your genes. It has a genetic impact. And that gets passed on in the sperm, in the egg, generation to generation to generation. And so when we're talking about trauma, it's not the thing, it's how we metabolize or don't metabolize the thing that has happened. And by metabolize, we mean heal it, feel it, process through it, give it space, all of that. And certainly our ancestors did not know how to deal with trauma, didn't even recognize it as trauma. And so that's the first piece. The intergenerational piece is real. And it, as Resmaa Menakem talks about in his book, it's real among cultures. There is white supremacy trauma that as white people we have inherited from our European ancestors. That's a whole nother topic. So there's the intergenerational trauma. There is the direct trauma that we experience through things in our life that we don't metabolize, that we just swallow, think that we just move past. That creates that imprint of trauma in our systems, I think that you're talking about. And there's also acute and chronic trauma, right? In ways that we don't even realize. I've realized that one of the chronic traumas I have that I'm healing through is the fact that as a kid, I never failed really. So I never developed any resilience or flexibility for failure. Like I was a straight A student. I walked on water. Everybody was like, you're going to be successful. You're going to do great things. And then as I got older and shit hit the fan and things weren't great and I did fail, I didn't know how to process that. So all of that's to say, if you are someone who's listening to this and you're like, I don't have trauma. Okay. How's that lack of awareness really working out for you? Because it comes back to what you said of being aware of it so you can heal it. So that was kind of long-winded, but I really want to unpack that trauma piece because I think it's so important in everything that you're talking about. And for people to be able, again, to make any type of shift or transition or movement in their life, to become aware of how trauma responses are getting in the way of that. So I just want to pause for a second because that was a lot of talking by me. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that if you have any reflections or anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah. If anyone is listening and feeling like, yes, I know there's some things to heal, but it's just, I don't have the time. I don't have the space in my life. It's so intimidating. I don't have the capacity. I want to let people know that where you're at is okay. And I want every single person to know you can heal. And not only does this bring the possibility of alleviating the pain when you learn to face it and move through it with support, there is so much depth and joy and fulfillment that emerges through the process of healing. And not just as an endpoint, not just when I'm completely healed, then I'll feel joy, I'll feel even more, really even through the process of facing pain and healing. There are so many profound moments of insight, of connecting to yourself, of opening to possibility and light that I really want to drive home for people. How much possibility and beauty there can be in this process so that it doesn't seem intimidating or scary.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Thank you for that. I want to kind of keep unpacking your story a little bit and then move on to how you are doing this work in the world now with your business. And one of the things that I want to rewind to a little bit is when you were talking about how unconscious people pleasing is and how throughout your life you had your voice tamped down and didn't even realize it really until later in life. What do you think were some of the societal, cultural, family, school, religion, like whatever they might be, messages that you received growing up that contributed to you not healing your sexual assault trauma, not finding your voice, not even realizing that you had a voice to share?
I love that you asked this question because there's an entire chapter in my book devoted to unlearning our conditioning, about questioning our beliefs, looking at where they came from, asking, is this a universal truth? So, for example, I grew up with the belief that people didn't want to hear my music, but my desperate hope was they would show up to my concerts or to listen to me just to be nice.
Oh,
And in 2017, when I was feeling the call in my heart to build my singer-songwriter career, you can imagine this was quite an obstacle to be
mm-hmm.
scheduling concerts and feeling like, but I don't think people really want to hear me sing. And underneath that, through the process of questioning, I discovered that there was a deeper fear, a deeper belief that my voice didn't matter. And so much of this came from not just personal trauma, but all the many messages. So first of all, there is the fact that humans have a negativity bias. We put a lot more weight on the negative experiences. So that's a factor. I'm going to
Yep.
acknowledge
Yep.
that to start.
Yeah. And let me just say,
Then
if for folks who haven't heard of the negativity bias, check out the
Mhm.
work of Dr. Rick Hansen for one. Put
Mhm.
the link in the show notes. But negativity bias is very powerful. So go ahead.
Yes, it's basically that we will give more weight in our mind to the negative experiences than the positive ones.
Yep. Yep.
So one factor that I feel affected me a lot was that in our current economic system, whether or not you believe it's the best way to organize an economy or not, the truth is that our current economic system does encourage us to think that achievement equals worth. And so when I looked at my singer-songwriter career and I saw, oh, well, I've released an album that didn't have a ton of buyers. I've done a few things here and there. Like I haven't achieved great success yet. And so I felt unworthy. And so learning to question that belief that came from the outside, right? And to return home to the fact that we are all worthy just for being. We don't have to earn our worth. We don't have to prove it. There's nothing you need to do in order to be worthy. There are many things you may love to do, you may want to do because you're here to have an impact and live a full life. But to separate that feeling of you have to achieve some success or something in order to feel worthy, that is the foundation of so many, so many harmful beliefs, really.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine contributed to the people pleasing, right?
Yes.
Like I have to do for others in order to prove my own worth. Not only
Yes.
do I have to be successful in my singing and whatever career I have, but I
Mm-hmm.
have to serve the crap out of other people in order to be worthy.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing that is worth mentioning that I picked up on from outside culture is that emotions are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a highly sensitive person,
Mhm.
and I have always felt things in a big way, both the joy and the sadness. I cry easily. And in school, from peers, from teachers, crying was always treated like a problem
Yep. Yep.
that
Still
needed to be
is.
fixed. It still
Yep.
is, yes.
Yep.
In my family, who was just doing their best, same thing. Like the default that everybody expected, because that's what everybody was comfortable with, was they wanted me to be cheerful.
Mm.
Anger, nope. Sadness, nope. Cheerfulness, yes. And so recognizing that this is not a universal truth, that feeling emotions is bad. In fact, it's the most natural thing that we go through as humans. It's part of our human nature to feel emotions. So, my adulthood and my healing definitely involved a lot of reclaiming that. And I do see the process of, as you say, we grow up in a time and a place where these things, they're just like the air we breathe. We just take them in, but that doesn't mean we're stuck in them. We do have the capacity to create our own islands of reclamation. And the good news is we don't have to do it alone. There are so many people out there who there are teachers you can follow. There are books that you can read. There's a whole practice in my book, Unleash Your Goddess Voice, which is about feeling emotions in a safe way, in a doable way. And even if the emotions belief isn't something that affected you deeply, no matter what it may be, these patterns are not set in stone. We have the capacity to grow beyond them and live into our best, most fulfilled versions of ourselves.
As somebody who also is a highly sensitive person, empathic too, I noticed in my life that it was very disorienting, discombobulating to have that trait and be told that emotions are not valid, and to live in a culture where, again, it was like from neck up, not a
Mm-hmm.
whole body experience. And so my whole life until like the last 5 or so years was all about judging and criticizing the fact that things affect me so deeply. Like how many, I remember as a lawyer, there was a mentor, older lawyer who I worked with, who I adored. And after my grandfather died, and we were all having a team meeting about a big litigation case we had, and I was upset. I was in a mood, didn't feel like lawyering that day. And something was said, and I started to get teary eyed. And this older lawyer, much older generational lawyer, said to me that you need to suck it up. There's no place for that here. And if you feel like you're crying, if you need to cry, you don't need to be here. And so that kind of messaging, which is such bullshit, right? And so if you're somebody who's listening to this and you feel that you haven't felt the space and the grace to get in touch with and acknowledge and validate your emotions, know that it is the I think one of it is the portal to what you're talking about, to feeling empowered and being purposeful. And B, if you're someone who thinks that emotions will make you weak or passive or unsuccessful or whatever it might be, and that you've gotten where you've gotten in life because you've got your emotions in control, I would plant a seed for those folks to question, well, how much more fulfilling, not from a comparative basis, but how much more empowered, more easeful, and more purposeful could your life be if you opened yourself up to feeling those emotions more deeply? So I greatly appreciate your explanation of that, because I know for me, and I think for a lot of folks, it's really going to plant some seeds to start to want to learn to embrace those emotions. And so let's talk about your book, because again, that's how we met, was at the book launch party. And you've hinted to some beautiful lessons and practices you have in your book. But tell us the title of your book, and let's start with what inspired you to write the book.
This book began nearly 6 years ago as me writing my story in a journal in the early morning before my kids were awake, before anybody else was. I just woke up and grabbed my pen and I wrote and I let it flow through. And I was so excited. I thought I was going to publish it in like 6 months. I started getting some feedback and saw that my story held a lot of beauty. And there was a lot of work and evolution to take what I needed to write for me and allow it to transform into something that served the reader.
Mm.
And during this time, there was also a lot of work clarifying my message. And the basis of the book is my story of healing my voice, bringing it into the world, managing all the feelings and fears that have come with speaking on stages, singing in front of audiences of thousands, being on TV, managing all of the feelings, the imposter syndrome, the inadequacies that come up, and following the healing journey. And each chapter has a theme and practices and concepts and a lot of client stories too, to help people learn how to be seen and heard, to help them build their resilience to speak up, sing out, and spread their message, to help them align their energy, align with their power to make themselves heard, to feel solid in themselves. There's practices on how do you actually open yourself as a conduit for what wants to come through. And this is my labor of love. Right now, I am running a group course and it's following the book, and I am receiving the most amazing gift of hearing the women in the group. And to be clear, this book is written from a female perspective and written to address the unique needs that women specifically have, bringing their voice into the world. So other genders are definitely welcome if they resonate with the message, but I like to be upfront that this is how the book is written, is to address the female perspective. And I am able to witness the power of these clients of mine who are going through the book chapter by chapter, reading it and telling me how healing it's been for them to read my story, to share what parts really land in them, what parts make them want to go out and sing or relate to their family members in a new way, or to start speaking and spreading their message with their business. So it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble online, plenty of independent bookstores like Powell's. You can also buy it online. And I'm sure there will be links to that in the show notes.
Yep, I'll put all that in there. And remind us again what the book is called.
Unleash your goddess voice. Build your resilience to speak up, sing out, and spread your message.
The title in and of itself says a lot. Referenced some of the practices. I know we talked about connecting to the breath, about turning toward recognizing trauma and finding support around healing trauma. Are there any other practices in the book, without giving away the book because we want folks to go get the book, but another practice that you'd like to share with listeners that they could start to implement kind of right now, right after listening to this?
Yes. So in the chapter called Learning to be Seen and Heard, I share some ways to recognize if you are in a situation with a person where they're likely to be able to meet you. So often we might have a desire to say something that's important to us. And people may or may not be in a position where they actually have the capacity to hear us, to listen without judgment. So sometimes it's because the other people just have patterns. Like, that if you share something vulnerable with somebody else, they're just going to go straight into advice giving. Or, they're just going to go straight into something like that. Exactly like that happened to my friend. Blah, 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 blah. Here's the story. When usually what would be more supportive is for them to listen, to be present, to offer presence, and ask what would be great to receive in return. And for people who do have that capacity, it's also possible that they may be in a day where they're just too stressed or too tired to offer that as well. So learning to ask yourself, is this a situation where the person has capacity to actually listen and offer presence when you want to share something? And the same goes for if someone wants to share something with you. So this is really important for boundary setting and going back to the people pleasing. So maybe a friend comes to me and they're going through something really rough and I can tell. Well, I may look and say, yeah, I have the capacity to hold space, to listen, to be present with them. But if I'm going through something really intense myself, in the long term, it's actually going to be better if I say, this is really important, but I don't have the capacity to support you with this right now. Maybe I can help you call a crisis line. Maybe I can help you think of someone else to call, but I don't have the capacity to be the listening ear right now. Because if you don't set that boundary, then you may end up feeling really resentful, which will poison the relationship long-term anyway. So getting to know, what does it feel like when you can listen to others and when others can listen to you, is a practical tip that can help you have more confidence in your voice. Because when you do speak up and share those needs or those vulnerable things, then you're more likely to be respected and met.
That's really helpful. And there's sort of two pieces to that. The first one is starting with the person who may want to seek support or have somebody listen to them. One of the things that I think we've both learned is that we want to be able to tell someone what we need in the moment. Mm-hmm. So that if we go to a good friend, and friends are great for advice giving, partners always want to fix. I think that's a tendency across all generations. It comes back to the people pleasing, comes back to people's own discomfort with what someone else is experiencing. So I'm going to get to that in a second in what you were saying. But if you're someone who's got something going on, to be able to identify for the person that you're coming to, I just need you to listen. I don't want advice. I don't want you to fix. I just need you to listen to me. And that's something I've learned to lean into a lot, and to find communities and spaces that people are working on just listening, I think is so important. So that's the first thing I hear in what you're saying, is that as the person who is wanting to give voice to something, to also be able to give voice to, what do I need in this moment? Maybe I do need advice. Maybe I do want somebody to help me fix it. And I've learned to ask for that too, and be very specific. I just need you to listen. I have coaching friends. I don't know if you've experienced this too. I have coaching friends who it's actually the opposite problem, that because coaches are trained to not give advice, to help somebody have their own insights. And sometimes, like, Jesus, I need your advice. I need somebody to tell me the logistics of how to do this. So can you please stop asking me questions to empower me? I just need you to tell me what to do. So listening, so let's come to the person then who's listening, right? And as you were saying, really getting curious with yourself of noticing that tendency to want to fix somebody else's problem, or to share your story, or to share a story of a friend. That's not truly listening, and that's not connecting. So I think the biggest, most important question somebody as the listener can ask is, what would feel most supportive for you? How can I support you? What do you need from me?
Yes.
And yeah, yeah. What chapter is that in your book where you talk about that practice?
Chapter 6.
Okay, didn't mean to put you on the spot, but yeah, that's just such a powerful, like, what I can only imagine how much better our immediate circles and our communities and the world would be if people could do those two things. If we could say to somebody, here's what I need, or if somebody could ask us, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
Just starting there. So you wrote the book, and you also have, as you mentioned, group programs and your business. So I want to talk about your business, and I want to go back a little bit to tell me how your business has been part of your healing journey.
So I got a degree in vocal performance, and I started my career out at 23 giving voice lessons. So in the first 10 years of my career, focused on just helping singers, helping people learn to sing and to build their confidence to be on stage. And yet I felt like I was teaching in a very traditional way. It was more surface work, focusing on technique, what you do with your body. And all this time, I had my inner journey going on, healing from trauma, practicing meditation and yoga, and healing through self expression. Yet I felt the need to keep this very compartmentalized. So it was like, here's my professional self, and here's my woo woo
Mm-hmm.
healing personal development self, and the two shall never meet.
Mm-hmm. Ah.
And I had an experience with a client who desperately needed emotional support that made me realize it was a disservice, not just to myself, but to my clients, to compartmentalize and lock away this personal side of myself. So this was about 7 years ago that I began merging all of my personal development work and really all of who I am with my work as a voice coach. I began helping people not just with singing, but also with public speaking. I began helping them speak on different platforms to spread their message. I began helping people to empower their voices. And my work now is focused on helping empathic women who are entrepreneurs, writers, or creatives, anyone who has a message to share and knows in their heart it's meant to reach more people. And I help them, even though they have empowered themselves in so many ways already. And I help them to empower their voices and believe in the importance of their message, and also get all the practical and logistical tools about how do you book a speaking gig if that's what you want to do, or how do you give your content in a way that really resonates. Right now I'm working with a client who is preparing for a TEDx talk.
Mm.
In about a month, she'll be giving it. And witnessing the evolution of her storytelling and her ability to get bigger and speak with more conviction and confidence. She already has the expertise. And yet there was a layer of, I don't want to seem, too off-putting or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so helping people put themselves out there and not just do it from okay, you got to do all these steps, but to do it in a way that aligns with the needs of your nervous system so you won't be overwhelming yourself. And that takes into account the needs of your body and all of your being so you can show up fully. That is my passion.
I hear that. I mean, that clearly comes through
Mhm.
in just how you speak, how you bring your energy into what you do. And I think you're such a great testament to how doing our own work in the end ends up serving and helping and supporting others. And I would imagine that, I mean, you talk about women who are, entrepreneurs wanting to do TED Talks and be on stage or speaking. I would also imagine that this isn't just for women who are doing those kinds of things, that your book, the kind of work that you do, is also helpful for women who want to find more of their voice in their home, want to find
Yes.
more voice in their workplace or among their friends or in
Mhm.
society in general. And so I love that through finding your voice, you are an inspiration for people, no matter where they are in life, what they want to do, to remember that finding your goddess voice, again, the energy of that isn't actually, it's not just about you. It's about how you can show up more fully for other people. So you mentioned that you have clients, you're doing some group programs. First of all, tell us the name of your business.
My business is called Embrace Your Voice, and my website is my first name and my middle name, SaraGiita.com. And everybody misspells my second name, Giita. It's strange. It is a Sanskrit name that I was given when I was a baby. And this particular spelling has two eyes, like we have two eyes in our head. So it's Giita. And what it means is song. So I have to keep using it, even if people misspell it, because my name is Sarah Song.
I will make sure I spelled that correctly. I'm looking at the Riverside title for our recording today, and I spelled it incorrectly. So thank you for telling me that. And tell me the story of how you got a Sanskrit name as a baby.
Oh, well, my parents met through a yoga and meditation organization. And if you think, oh, yoga and meditation, like a yoga studio, some soft lights, that's like a tiny sliver of what yoga is.
Mm-hmm.
And so this yoga and meditation group, straight out of India, vegetarian diet, all kinds of practices and a whole culture. So I grew up with friends inside this organization and also living a suburban, quiet, blend in life. So I had this kind of dual culture, if you will. And one of the ceremonies is that parents can choose to have their babies have a baby naming ceremony when they're 6 months old. And so I was given the name Giita as my Sanskrit name, and I use it as my middle name now.
How much do you think that Sanskrit name influenced or planted seeds for you to become a singer and a voice coach?
I don't know. I think it was all destiny.
Because that's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think that's coincidence. I don't really believe in
Yeah.
coincidence, and I definitely that's not coincidence.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story. I'm so glad you shared that. I didn't know that. So
Mhm.
Giita, that's just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started to ask, what kind of programs do you have to offer through your business?
Yes. So I work one on one with clients. At times, I launch groups as well, but right now, the offerings that are available are one on one. And I have two different offerings. So, one is focused on helping people prepare for a specific speech or to prepare their signature talk. So, this is if someone
Mm.
has something scheduled already and they're saying, oh, shoot, I really want to do a good job. And I could use some support to handle nerves, organize your content, to develop more stage presence and more impactful delivery. And the other offering is focused on developing your stage presence and bringing out your authentic voice. And I have people choose a project. It's called the Goddess Voice Project, and it can be anything you want. It can be booking speaking gigs, doing some kind of performance art or concerts. It can be speaking on podcasts. And so I help people both with the inner work and the empowerment to bring this project into the world, as well as the logistics.
Do you have people
Mhm.
that come to you who are terrified of public speaking, but maybe have to do it or think they should do it, or it's just not something they've done? Because public speaking is the number one fear, right? Not a fear I
Right.
have. But so do you get people who are terrified of it?
I often get people who they would have described themselves as terrified. And then they've already done some work. Maybe they've gone to some Toastmasters and kind of felt
Mm-hmm.
like they maxed out where they could get with that. And they want more because it's still uncomfortable and it still doesn't feel natural for them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's been more often that the fear has lessened over time, but they feel like there's still more.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of experience helping people get on stage and a lot of tools for navigating the nervousness and befriending it, really, because in the end it's just sensation, and it is your body telling you that this matters.
Yeah. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. I would imagine to learn to sort of take ourselves out of it. It's this like
Mhm.
balancing act of we want to
Mhm.
embrace all of the uncomfortable feelings and the fear because they're all teaching us something and they're protecting us too. And we also kind of want to detach ourselves from it and really tap into the inner voice that wants to show up and serve for others. So it's this kind of tricky balancing act that I think is so important to have somebody like you there guiding and supporting people through that. So what's your what's your hope or vision or greatest desire, maybe is the better word, for your book and the work that you're doing in the world?
Everything I do is centered around my desire to create a culture of mutual empowerment. I talk in the book about the culture of domination, which is it encompasses patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, racism, heterosexism, domination over the Earth's ecosystems, anything that's based on one group of people claiming superiority over another group of people or plants and animals,
Mm-hmm.
ecosystems, then is part of the culture of domination. And it leaves people scrambling for their worth to try to prove that they're enough, that they're superior. And the thing that I really want to drive home is there is another way. And I call that the culture of mutual empowerment. It's the concept of all ships rise. If I rise up, then everybody else can too. And through the book, my hope is that people who have already empowered themselves and yet still feel like there's some habits of dimming their voice or people pleasing or doubting their gifts, is that they can start to more fully own their gifts, to empower themselves and know that that will contribute to our collective empowerment and to uplifting the voices of all people. All voices matter, and we need to hear your voice.
Oh, huge amen to that. Yeah, that is a message that I want for you to be able to sing it far and wide because I can only imagine right now what our world, but even our smaller communities, what our families would be like if everybody could embrace that kind of culture of mutuality because I think that's beautiful and I think that's what we're here for. So you've shared your website and the name of the book. Tell us where else folks can find you if they want to work with you or learn more about you.
So you can find Unleash Your Goddess Voice, the book, on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble. Oh, I mentioned before. It's available a lot of places online if you search for Unleash Your Goddess Voice. You can also find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. And I also run a networking meetup. So if you are a woman entrepreneur who would love to connect with other like-minded people for mutual support, you can search up the Sassy and Soulful Women Entrepreneurs group on Meetup.
Which I highly recommend. That's how we met you. It's a fabulous group. And I'll make sure everything is in the show notes so that everybody can find you. And you also have, I'll put this in the show notes too, but folks can sign up on your website for your weekly newsletter, which newsletter doesn't even do it justice. What's a better word that we could call that?
I call it a blog.
Yeah, love it. Because I get them. They're beautiful. They're inspiring. They bring me back to earth and to myself. So I'm deeply grateful to you sharing that every week. And so if folks want to start learning and kind of getting used to you, dipping their toe into these waters, because again, we want to recognize that this isn't something you just want to go full in. If you have these habituated patterns and belief systems and traumas, we want to move gently and slowly in unlearning and rewiring those. So your blog would be a great place for people to start. Yeah, so let me take you. Go ahead.
If you sign up for that, you can get access to 16 different recorded practices from the book. They're called the Unleash Your Goddess Voice practices. So you get bonus, you can receive the blog and also start working with your voice in a way to empower it and connect more with your authenticity.
What a gift. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's a huge free set of resources just for signing up for your weekly blog. So I hope people do that.
Yes.
All right. So let me take you through a modified lightning round. Since you're not Gen X, and that's okay.
I know. But I'm close. I'm married to a Gen Xer. All my friends are Gen Xers. I'm like 3 years away.
Yeah. And you work with a lot of Gen Xers. Like I want to say that I know work with a lot of women of my generation. And at the end of the day, right, it's just a label. Like I use the label because I think it's helpful again, when we look at the formative years that we were growing up and what was going on at those time periods and in culture, in our societies and our systems of oppression that got implanted in us and impacted us in ways as you've talked about as adults. And so anyway, it's just a label at the end of the day. So let me take you through a quick lightning round and tell me your fondest childhood memory.
I used to love going in the backyard and I would collect leaves and dried flowers and things, and I'd make a mud pie.
That's beautiful. A mud pie. I don't know if I ever made a mud pie. I might have, and I just don't remember.
It's not too late, Michelle.
I know. I should, now that the weather's getting nicer, I should go out in my back garden and make a mud pie. I love that. Don't eat it, kids. Don't eat the mud pie. But yeah, use it to get your hands dirty and put stuff together and see how all these beautiful things from nature come together to make something pretty neat. So yeah, that's great. I have great memory. What is your biggest piece of advice for Gen Xers who are kind of standing at the threshold of a transition that they don't know how to move through?
The audio cut out. Could you repeat the question?
Yep. I'm sorry. It tends to do that. I'll go back and deal with that in post editing. But what is your biggest piece of advice for Gen Xers who are standing at the threshold of a transition but don't know how to move through?
Love yourself. Give yourself compassion. It's not soft. It won't make you weak. It will make you strong.
100%. Then there's studies to prove that point. If you need the science, 100%. I love that. What would your theme song be for your life?
I'm walking on sunshine. Whoa.
I love that you sang for us. And that is actually a great Gen X song. And yeah, that's such an uplifting song and such a good metaphor for life. I can see that for you. Yeah. And lastly, what are you most proud of being someone of your generation, a millennial?
I'm most proud that I feel like a lot of millennials and people of all generations are into the reclaiming of creativity and centering creativity, and that it matters.
Yes. Another big amen. I think if there's one thing that a lot of Gen Xers have started to move toward, and maybe there were some seeds planted for millennials, maybe millennials saw some other seeds being planted elsewhere, so we can learn from the millennials. But this cross-generational invitation to embrace our creativity to lean into that more and remember that it does not make you weak, doesn't make you passive. It will allow you to use your voice in a way that really serves others from a place of wholeness instead of from lack. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sara. I am so deeply grateful to have met you. This conversation just really inspired and lit up a lot of energy in me. And I hope and know that a lot of listeners will feel the same. So thank you for continuing to do this work in the world and for spending some time with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Michelle, and to everyone who is listening.
Hey, how did that conversation land for you? I'd be curious to hear what's coming up for you. If you had any challenging emotions that you noticed coming up, if you had any resistance to some of what we were talking about, if you had some big insights or ahas. My big takeaway from this conversation is that when we learn how to slowly and gradually lean into finding, unlocking, and embracing the power of our inner voice, that we can learn to access that gold that I talked about that's deep inside each and every one of us. And as Sara talked about, we are so often limiting, silencing our inner voice because of layers of societal, cultural, oppressive systems that have told us that you don't deserve a voice. You don't deserve to be heard or seen. And I hope that you take away from this that is all a bunch of crap. You, my love, deserve to be seen and heard. And I hope that this conversation invited you into being able to tap into that inner voice so that you can find that gold inside you that others of us want to see and hear. So until next time, stay gold, Gen Xers.